I had to launch one the other day and that wasn't successful, so. Okay, we will open up the Monday, October 26th council workshop and roll call show that all counselors are present. And the first item on the agenda is municipal property review, Keith Anderson Community House Committee report.
I think that's Tom.
Well, I think Megan is going to start. Is she here?
Okay. Yep. Oh,
Can't hear you.
Belle, do I have the option to share my screen or?
You sure do.
Okay, hopefully this works. Says everybody always in every Zoom meeting. Okay, let me try this again. All right, share my screen. Okay. Oop. Let's do that one. Hopefully this works. Or not. I don't know, it's telling me that I don't have access. Let's see, if I do it this way, maybe that. Yeah, it's saying open system preferences, security and privacy to grant access. Maybe we should have worked this out ahead of time. Okay.
Yeah, everybody has the ability to share. If you wanted to send it to me real quick, Megan, I could share it from my screen if you wanted.
That is probably way better to do than, let's see. Bell. There we go. All right, I shared it with you, Belle. So will I have to tell you next slide like the old-fashioned days? Okay, great. Yeah, we should have done a dress rehearsal, I guess.
Okay, I'm getting ready to share my screen.
Okay. Okay, perfect. All right, so I thought that it would be useful for folks to maybe get a little bit of background and information about the Keith Anderson Community House, because it is such a fixture in our town, but I don't know that everyone really knows the history of it out there. And the history is part of why it presents such an interesting challenge for us in terms of repairs and maintenance to the building. So if you could, next slide. Thank you. Okay. So the original building was constructed in 1833 and it was dedicated in 1834. It was built as the first Congregational Church of Orono, which is interesting. When it was remodeled around the time of the Civil War. So basically, actually, could you advance the slide again, Bill? I think it's just cool to take a look at this. This is after its remodel post Civil War, and you can notice that it is the tall building that we see today. But this also, we had no. This is just a side effect of the whole lumber industry, but we had like no trees anywhere. Anyway, that has nothing to do with the building. I'm just a nerd. Okay, so back to the building. Around the time of the Civil War, thanks to an act from the Maine state legislature, I don't know why exactly they had to give permission for this, but the folks were able to raise the building up. Can you advance the slide again? So you'll see this bottom section where the current entrance is, and what we see as the brick part of the building when we look at it. All of that was added in 1867. So they took the building and they put it up on stilts. I think they moved it back from the road a little bit as well. And then they built this second story, but on the ground floor. So they put a vestry on ground level. And can you advance it again? So this is the entrance. I think this is 1916, and you can see some of the similarities. Obviously, the building was in a little bit better shape around the front area back then, and had some nice big wooden double doors and wooden shutters. Of course, many modifications have happened to the building over time, which we'll see more of. Next slide, please. So this is the current entrance. We have our, accessible doors now. We've got a little bit of change around the exterior. We have some lovely flower beds. Thank you, Orono beautification folks. But as you can see, there's definitely some wear and tear on the building. Next slide, please. And this is just interesting, I thought. So this is some folks playing tennis on an old grass court, and this is behind the what was the church, the Keith Anderson Center. So next slide will show you kind of in context where that is. It's kind of cool, I thought. So whether it was being used as a church or into its next life, as we'll see momentarily, it's always been kind of a nexus for community activity. Yes, it did serve as a church for a good chunk of its history, but even still, it was just sort of a place around which people congregated and gathered. Next slide, please. So this photograph is from 1940, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. In 1918, the Congregational and Universalist churches in town merged, and they decided to make their new home over, well, it wasn't new to the Universalists, they were already there, but over on Main Street. So the current Church of Universal Fellowship sort of exists out of this merger between the Congregational and Universalist churches that happens in 1918. So the Congregational Church moves out of the building on Bennick Road, which was Bennick Street back then. And the Women's Christian Temperance Union, if you could advance the slide, Bill. This is a close-up of that. So in the center of the photo, you'll see Monument Square, the Katahdin building, which burned down years ago. That was the original home of the Orono Public Library, and it was founded and run by the Women's Christian Temperance Union. And when the building on Bennick Street became available after the Congregational Church moved out, they moved over to the first floor of that building. You'll see in this photo from the 1940s that the church spire is gone. That was removed at one point, and we had a fun little field trip, Tom and I climbing up into the rafters of the church and looking around, and it's cool. You can see where they removed that steeple. And it looks kind of like the inside of a ship's hull up there, which is interesting, all these old beams and everything. But so when it was decommissioned as a church, they removed that. And so it now begins to take the shape that we're all familiar with. If you could advance the slide, please. So it continued to function as a community center. And when the library moved in there in 1918, actually a group of residents got together and formed a corporation. So it was called the Orono Public Library and Community Center Corporation. And we have about 40 years worth of notes and documents from that corporation. So the idea was this group of concerned civic-minded residents were going to get together, form basically what we would think of as a nonprofit now, in order to maintain a library in a community space. But the ultimate plan was always to eventually turn the entire operation over to the town of Orono. So for about 40 years, 30 or 40 years, the library was in the basement, and it was, there were donations from the town, $200 in 1928 when they opened, and then it was up to around $700 by the 1960s. But mostly the building was funded by, they would have fundraiser drives. They would have different social organizations in town would rent the space and put on dinners or card games to raise money to take care of the building. So it was a real community effort because unlike a lot of libraries, it did not have an endowment or a benefactor taking care of it. So the community all really pitched in to take care of it. And this is where the unique qualities of the building come into play, because one of the ways that the corporation saved money over that 30 or 40-year period was that when there were repairs that needed to be done, it was the board members themselves that tended to do the repairs. Occasionally, they would call in a skilled worker if they needed a highly skilled worker for a particular task, but a lot of the work was just done piecemeal by whoever sort of could volunteer their time and their efforts. So there are a lot of quirks in that building, and that is one of the reasons why. I don't even remember what the next slide is, but let's see. Okay, the library moved over to the high school in the early 1960s. And then the building just continued to function as a hub for the community. So the thrift store that we know over in Birch Street School now, for a time it operated on that first floor. There was a youth center operating there, and it just continued to be kind of rented out by different groups, who wanted to use the space. So it's really always been a really central part of the community and a place for folks to gather. And unfortunately, because of that sort of piecemeal patchwork approach to the maintenance of it, and also because it's just been changed around and shifted as needs arose, and due to budgetary constraints, it's shape shifted quite a lot inside and outside. So unfortunately, it does not qualify to be registered as an historic building because it's had too many modifications, which is part of what makes it a little bit difficult in terms of financing it. But the good news is that it really has served this great purpose for the community, and it has shifted and changed to meet the community's needs over the years. So now we have to continue that path forward. I think that's the last slide, right, Belle?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thanks for indulging my history nerd bent.
Hey, Megan and Tom, do you guys know what happened to the steeple? Is it still in Orono somewhere?
I think it was just taken apart.
Taken apart and demolished, possibly?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So that was a great introduction and certainly demonstrates the unique history of that particular building. Our committee, Megan, myself, John McCormick, and Mitch, began our work back in the spring of 2019. Through John's extensive contacts, we were able to arrange for several different engineering firms to do different kinds of studies on the building. The good news is the building is certainly worth saving and preserving. The not so good news is there is some significant repairs and upgrading that needs to be done over a period of time. While a lot of it is in reasonable condition now, it doesn't meet current standards in a lot of different ways. So we looked at the structural integrity of the building. We looked at the hazardous material that might be in the building. We looked at the mechanical systems, all the electrical systems, plumbing and so forth. We looked at how the building is currently being used. We had a very interesting tour, as Megan mentioned, of the attic of the building. And we put all of those studies together, which are on the Google Drive for you to look at, quite technical in many of them. We put those all together and worked with an architect to try to put some price tags on things. And one of the documents in the Google Drive was a memo from John kind of summarizing the work. And just to review that, the results of the reports indicate that structurally, with the exception of the roof repair, which is needed, and some repair under the current kitchen on the second floor, there's a broken beam there. The building is in structurally good shape.
Yeah.
With some limits to occupancy, and the building is in good condition, but an elevator is needed on the outside of the building. Heating, plumbing, electrical systems are okay at this point, but again, updated is needing. And the heating system really is approaching the end of its life. It needs to be replaced.
Mhm.
We also think we ought to have some air conditioning, especially on the second floor for summer use. The hazmat report indicated that there are some materials in there that need to be addressed, but not dramatic, not a real significant problem. The architect that we work with put together a cost estimate, and again, just a general estimate of $725,000 to do all of the maintenance work that needs to be done, interior and exterior, with the exception of the roof work, which structurally we need to do some work there, and a new heating system. So realistically, again, ballpark figures, you could estimate that the total repair, if you did everything at once, would be well over $1 million. I think, again, John was extremely helpful in using his contacts to line up some really good people to look at it with us. And now we're anxious to get some feedback and to determine some next steps. And I'm wondering, John, if there's something that I might have missed that you want to add on there.
No, Tom, that was a good summary. One of the things the structural people said when they looked at it was how solid the building is, because they said they've looked at a lot of similar old buildings, and the foundations are in rough shape and it's not worth saving, but they were impressed about how solid the building is. So as you said earlier, Tom, it's definitely worth saving. A lot of the stuff is cosmetic, and in addition to the utilities and those things there, but it's certainly worth keeping for sure.
So that's kind of our report, and we have some thoughts of where we might go next, but we're interested in seeing how the group feels about it.
I'll jump in if that's all right.
Sure.
First of all, thank you, all three of you, for the work you've done. I mean, great presentation, Meg. Thank you. That was fascinating. Tom, thanks for your overview. And John, John's a friend of mine, so I'm going to give him a hard time here. But a question, that's a lot of money. And obviously this is a huge asset to the community, I think. But is this investment over $1 million, as you say, Tom, is this to get us to a ship-shape standard of what it was before? Or is this an opportunity where we could explore new possible uses for this? I mean, make it even more of an asset to the community. I mean, you know what I mean? So just sort of like forward thinking.
Yeah, great question, Sam. And I think the answer is yes to both questions. I think the estimate provides an opportunity to bring everything up to standard, current day standards, and to look at the interior configuration and make sure that the configuration, especially in the downstairs, meets what we think would be the future needs in the community for that space. The upstairs, the auditorium sort of setting is pretty clear. We would need to do some new bathrooms and so forth there, but the downstairs is pretty open in terms of what the community use might be.
do you anticipate community use, or do you anticipate municipal offices down there?
Ah, I guess we didn't cross that bridge. I think it could be either. But that wasn't something that we delved into, honestly.
I will tell you that, at least on my radar screen right now, the way it's configured, I would not be looking to put municipal offices there. When we just had 2 people over there, it was way too isolating, I think, and it wasn't really set up for the community to come in and out. So if I was going to think about, if we keep the space and we're going to renovate the space, I would think of it more as community space. So right now we've got the land trust uses that as an office, which they have to have for their accreditation. We've got community programming happening there. So that's kind of would be my initial feedback to that.
Are there,
library is also
any
over
opportunities for grants? And I know I've asked this before, but any opportunities for grants to help with this fundraising?
So I think we can always try, Cheryl, where it is not a historic, doesn't qualify as a historic building. I think it becomes a much more difficult project to try to get grant funding for. Long term, depending upon what council wants to do with the downtown and transit oriented TIF, as a community gathering space, I think there's an argument that could go for like USDA public facilities loan, long-term loan, if we needed to do that. But I mean, whether you take it out in pieces or all at once, $1.2 million to $1.5 million is still a lot of money.
Right.
And I had just one more other question too, and that was, I should have written it down. Not grant money, but, oh, it will come to me. I'm sorry, I lost it. It's in there somewhere though.
Is there anything like a public-private partnership that would this be up for, or a fundraiser? Like we did with the library?
Yeah.
I think we would have to find a group of very passionate, dedicated, enthusiastic folks, because the library fundraising was long-term and a lot of work. And I think it's possible to potentially do that.
I think the library also had a very clear vision of what it was and where that money was going. I mean, it was a library and they had everything planned out. And it was really clear. This seems a little bit more ambiguous. It's this amazing facility that could be lots of things. So I think if we had a clearer vision of what we saw this to be, you know what I mean? Is it an open space where arts events could happen? Stillwater Community Arts could, use this with some of their functioning, or other people were doing like do the square dance thing, whatever, but have a true community center. I don't know, but I think we kind of need to get our head around that. But I like the idea of a partnership like what happened with the Library Foundation. So anyway, Terry, I'm waiting to hear your and Lori's thoughts.
Well, first, yeah, the 1.5 on that's we don't really know. If you start really getting into the nitty gritty, a lot of these older places tend to fly a bit higher above the actual projection cost. And then immediately I start thinking 1.5 million, gosh, could that create a whole new space by itself? But understanding that it is an important part of the community, I would say that if this was going to be a way of fundraising or whatever, that I think that the first priority should be the roof to protect the asset. Don't because I mean the conversation was kind of like, this is going to do all this, but the roof is like an afterthought. But I just think that the roof should be the first thing, just because we don't know. COVID's going to be going on indefinitely. People are tightening. It's hard to say. So if we at the front end wanted just to at least protect the asset, the roof should come first.
thanks for mentioning that, Terry, actually, because the sort of that has echoed a lot of the conversations that that we've had in this subcommittee about, for example, we can't quite use the space because of its size and because of COVID restrictions. So we do have some time before it can really be used in the way that it used to be, with distancing and whatnot. So so there's that. The other thing is we talked quite a bit, from meeting to meeting about prioritizing. If we were going to take a piecemeal approach to the project, prioritizing what aspects would come first and which ones were kind of further down the list. And so the roof is a good point. Another good point is Tom mentioned the elevator, but part of the thing that's going on there is that the accessibility issues in that building are a problem. So for example, if you've been on that second floor, there's a lift, which is not an elevator, although it gets used as an elevator sometimes and then breaks. But it's a people lift. Unfortunately, if you require accessibility for a bathroom and you have taken the lift up to the second floor, because you have to go upstairs behind the stage for a bathroom on the second floor, that means you actually have to get back in the lift, go down to the first floor, go all the way to the back of the building. It could be a 45-minute process, for somebody who needs that accessible bathroom. So relocating an elevator to the exterior of the building would potentially allow for that lift space to be turned into an accessible bathroom on the second floor. So these are the kinds of conversations that we were having about. Obviously, we wish we could wave a magic wand and do all of it at once, but if we had to do it in a piecemeal approach, what are the priorities? And you're right, it's those kinds of things that we're thinking about.
And that segued to my question. That actually was my question. So what is the sense from the committee of the urgency for, I know if a building sits unused for a little bit, not just the priorities, but how soon does this need to happen before it becomes more than 1.5 million or 1 million? What's the sense of urgency here?
Another good question. I think there is some level of urgency on a couple of things. Actually, the outside appearance from my perspective, is a pretty high priority. It looks, to use a non-technical term that John shared with me, it looks shabby. And it really needs to have some work done. In fact, Mitch has been gathering some recent information on what that might look like and what the cost might be there. Interestingly, the structural issue on the roof is not as much of an immediate emergency, I don't think, as it might sound like. It's not that there's any leaking taking place. It's just that the current load requirements on roofs would require us to do quite a bit of structural work there. But because there's no insulation, the snow does not accumulate on the roof. So the roof has withstood the many storms over these almost 200 years and not been a problem, really. John or Megan, I don't know if you want to have anything to add to that.
I guess I'd only add that just to touch on this question of appearance, that is one of the things. So as the liaison to the Historical Society, when I mentioned that this project was starting, one of the things that was a really high level of concern for those folks who have seen Orono grow and change over the decades is that there was a period of time in the town's history decades ago, when the beautiful historic buildings were just sort of being, and I think that they were, folks in the Historical Society were just really concerned, saying, is this another building that Orono is just going to give up on and tear down? And then we'll lose a beautiful historic building. And so I think it's not just about the question of appearance, but really is the town committed to actually keeping up this almost 200-year-old building?
That kind of segues into my comments. I agree with Terry that if, you know, if the roof needs to be done to preserve the building, I think then I would support doing those kind of things. But my question about like adding an elevator, or does that change the historical appearance of the building if it's on the outside? And are you taking away then all of the nice things about the building, and should you just build a new one? I know I'm going to get hit for that, but
There have been other non-historic additions to the building. I mean, that's one of the things I was really trying to touch on in the slideshow, is that this is a building that has really morphed and shifted based entirely on what the community needs. And I think that's kind of interesting. Even going back to that first major renovation in 1867, they probably could have just built a new building, but they decided to just do this strange, you know, lifting the whole building up and building something underneath it. And so just as the community has needed different things. And so, for example, you know, the original building certainly didn't have that fire escape built onto the side of the building, but we have that because I think that was from the 50s, 60s, I want to say. It was a while ago, but it has attracted different pieces and bits over the years based on what's necessary for safety, and also just what the community needed at the time.
I'm still waiting to hear from Lori.
Cindy, I'd like to address that too. I think if we found a good architect, which we know of several, I think they could make that outside elevator look okay and mesh with the building suitably. I believe that could happen.
I want to thank all of you who have worked on this. As you guys know, and maybe those listening may or may not know, for my day job, I work on making buildings more energy efficient. And what you may not know is that I tend to focus on the buildings built in the 19th century up until World War II. And so John McCormick and I have worked together on the Church of the Universal Fellowship, especially the older sections of the building, not the new addition, but yes, I've also worked on the new addition, but mostly on the older sections. And so I completely support the idea of doing what we can to take this beautiful building and keep it something that we have. And so I want to tell the people in the Historical Society that I'm always in support of keeping these beautiful buildings. And we, in the work I do, we actually say that some of these buildings, if you talk to engineers, might be considered overbuilt in some ways because they didn't have the design specs, and so they made sure that it was structurally sound. So I thought that was reasonable when the structural description said, looks like the foundation is strong and there's some cracks, but they're not anything we should be worried about. And that's what I've seen from looking at this building myself. As far as the snow load description, it is true that based on today's engineering, it's underbuilt for the snow load, but it's shown by being there for all those years, and there's no record of the fact that any previous snow has caused it to have problems. That wasn't because it was heated on the inside, because when this building was built, and probably for at least its first 100 years, it was not heated all day, every day, 24/7. That was not the standard way to manage these buildings. And so it used to get quite a snow load that just sat there until it evaporated, sublimed. And so I'm not as concerned about making greater structure on the roof, even though I know that the people who did the engineering specs on that meets all of their calculations, but there's no data to support, meaning no one's ever said it had a snow load problem in the past. And with global climate change, we expect that we'll have actually more intense storms, but not many of them. So there's a possibility we'll get storms as intense as what used to happen around here. But we haven't had that much snow load for, it's getting less every year as far as what stays on the building between storms, because we get warm weather between storms. So, and the other thing is I looked around, I really appreciate the things that were on the Google Drive, but I didn't actually, when I queried, I didn't find a folder. So I was looking at individual items that had either the word Keith or Anderson or proposal in them. And I never actually found the description of what each cost was. So I saw there was the document that was attached to this, this agenda had, for example, that the elevator would be $72,000. It also had a line item for $462,000. And it didn't actually, I couldn't find the document that told me what all of that $462,000 was. So I would love to sit down with someone. I understand because I'm not the counselor on this committee that I can't go to that committee and talk with the two counselors, but I'd be happy to talk with one individual person, or maybe just John, and go through the proposals and descriptions, because I do this for a living, and I'd be happy to bring my eye for these kinds of buildings. I worked on many churches in Maine. I worked on many buildings built in the 19th century. And one of the things that was also clear is that there's no insulation at all in the walls or the ceiling or the foundation. And we know that by making buildings more energy efficient in their building envelope, that we have to spend less money to keep them warm, because much as a Coleman cooler keeps either the heat or the cold in, a well-insulated and air-sealed building means that you can buy a smaller heating system to keep it warm or cool. And so I would advocate, although I didn't see the specs, so I don't know if the specs included insulation and air sealing, I would advocate that those would be the most important, unless the roof is leaking. If the roof is leaking, that's obviously the most important. If there's a structural problem, that's most important. But I don't think that the fact that the engineer said that the roof might not be structurally strong, I don't think, of all the churches I've worked on, usually the only problem is that steeples don't have quite enough structure, and then they're gone, like this one's gone. But the rest of it, I think, is probably fine. But again, I didn't do the studies and I didn't get to read them all. I read the ones that I could find. So if I could make an appointment with someone to go over the rest of the documents, that would be great.
Great.
Oh, and the last thing is, sorry, one more thing, which is, I think that for raising money, a clear vision of what we want this building to be, the town council, and not the committee, but maybe a community. We have open sort of, in architecture they call them a charrette, in incremental development and Build Maine, they talk about community groups where you bring in the community. There's a cost to that, because they'd have to staff it and maybe hire a consultant that manages these groups of people getting together. And with COVID, there's a challenge of how we get together. But I think that if we brought people together to envision what they would want in a community building, and of course we present the parameters of accessibility, ADA compliant, and having an elevator, and the list of things that we assume are the right things for our community, that I think there'd be a lot more buy-in, and that would make fundraising, as was with the library projects, it makes fundraising so much clearer, because we have a very community-focused set of goals for the building.
Good points.
Are there any other comments, or do you guys have what you need from us? I'm not sure where you want to go. I mean, we're supportive, I guess, is what you're hearing. But
Yeah, I think hearing support is something we really wanted to hear, and thank you for that. I think we might want to, as a committee, get together again and see if we can prioritize some of these things a little more, and bring that back to you. I do like the idea of doing some work in terms of what the community's vision of the use of that building would be. I think that's some good points that were brought up there. Megan or John, do you want to add anything to it? Or Mitch? I kind of left Mitch out. Mitch was a key ingredient in this work.
A couple of things that I've thought about in working through this is that I think when we talk about the use, it has been very kind of need-based. And I kind of chuckled a little bit when I went through this because I found the renovation plans in 1979 to the building. And I realized that what they did in 1979, 2 years ago, we put back the same way. So it had switched in between 1979 and 2 years ago, a number of different ways. And then we put it back to that configuration because we needed it that way. And that's really how this building has been used. And even in talking it was the library. And then when the library didn't need it anymore, it was it was this. And there were offices in there for a little bit. And the Historical Society was in there for a little bit. And I think that is the challenge with that space, is that there has been no clear use that drives it and gives us a really a good look at, we should be doing it this way. As far as the Parks and Rec department, we use it because that's pretty much the only facility that we have that has a big enough space for us to do it, but it's very limited in what we can do there. But it is a great community space. And so those are the pieces. I think the other thing that when we talked through this, the ADA piece, we hear an elevator and that seems to make sense, but there are a lot more things in the building that need to be done from an ADA standpoint. And that's all based on the percentage of the building that you fix. And as we take on this renovation, some of those bigger costs are attached to that. As simple as the doors work, but they're not up to today's width. But you can get through there if you make it through. And it's kind of been that way with a lot of the stuff there. And as Megan said, with individuals doing the repairs, we've done stuff in that building recently that we look around and go, what? Why is this like this? Because that's how they repaired it then. And I think for us all, I think the questions is how do you where do you want to be and how do you get there? Obviously that price tag seems high, or expensive. It's probably not high. I think the other thing that we would add, and hopefully these will change, but as we had denoted after the fact, that these are not COVID numbers. These are numbers that were put together before COVID. And we all know that the price of a 2x4 is much greater right now. So there are lots of things that you don't know going into this. And I think that's the piece that I look at and say, as I was been running more numbers and I know more about construction costs than I ever did before. So I learned something, which is I appreciate. But there are just so many factors that's what I think Tom's right in, that we need to kind of look to prioritize what directions make sense and what those things are and how one thing affects another. I think I was thinking the same thing when Tom said about the roof. Was what we were told was the roof was working fine because it's not heated up there. The heat was rising up, melting the snow. So we didn't really need to do much with the roof until we fixed the insulation. And once you fix the insulation, what happens? And so how do you pair those things together so that when you do the job, you didn't create another problem that you weren't aware of? So I think there's a lot of factors, and I think Tom's right, us getting back together and kind of walking through those a little bit and maybe get a clearer picture of what that looks like makes some sense.
Thanks, Mitch.
Can I ask just one last question? Does the building meet code right now? And is there a chance that it won't meet code if it's just left unattended?
I'm not sure who wants to answer that.
As far as I am aware, that we do meet all the code based on the building, the age of the building, and everything that is there. We have done everything that we need to do to make it that way. What changes things, especially with the ADA, is as you fix things, you have to bring those things up to the current code, and so that's when things change.
Good.
Thank you.
It sounds like we might have a plan for you guys to go back and have more work in front of you.
Yep.
Maybe give us a couple of priorities and maybe kind of a path forward if you think that it's something we should just put in the budget and we'd want budget discussions, or if any suggestions on how we would get the money, I guess. But, is, thank you.
We'll take that charge and go with it.
All right. Thank you very much. It was very interesting. The next council discussion, review of proposals received to purchase 25 College Heights. I'm going to ask Tom to chair this one as I.
I have just one question. So is there someone that I can meet to go over the proposals? Would that be?
Laurie, I think I can answer that. Would love to meet with you. Both Tom and I and Mitch and Meg, we wanted to get a package together to get this thing moving, but we've got to go over the tasks and the priorities and some of the cost figures. Some of them just don't seem right. So I'd rather get that all done before we get together with you, if that's okay.
All right, well, just keep me posted. I'm happy to go over it, and
Okay.
we've worked together, and
Yeah,
my goal is always the lowest cost investments for the best long-term, best long-term, which would be lowest energy use and lowest maintenance cost and greatest longevity.
okay.
So, I will give my lens of that after you guys have whatever it is you want to show me.
Okay, great.
I appreciate your comments on this, Lori. They were very helpful.
Thank you. So item number 3, I'm going to ask Councillor Perry to chair as I have a conflict. So I will.
Aha.
Quiet.
Well, council discussion, review of proposals received for the purchase of 25 College Heights tax acquired property. And are you going to kind of lead us through that, Sophie?
I'm gonna start you off, but this is a
There you
council choice, and I feel like since I live on the street, I want to make sure I'm not I'm not influencing what you're doing. So we foreclosed on 25 College Heights for unpaid property taxes. There were some code violations there, and the former owner was not responsive, so council decided to forego the normal property redemption process and go straight to putting it out to bid. There was some pre-work that had to be done with that because the property owner potentially has left some personal property, so we had to make notifications. We went ahead and advertised the property for sale by through a negotiated sale. What we asked for in that announcement was bidder contact information, a proposed purchase price, a detailed plan to correct property code violations, a proposed timeline for corrective action, and then the proposed future use of the parcel. So this negotiated sale is a little bit different than a typical tax acquired sale, which you get a bunch of sealed envelopes, and whoever bids the highest amount, unless there is a very clear reason why you don't want them to have the property, like they are a person that we have historic tax acquired issues with or historic code violations with, you would just go ahead and quit claim the town's interest in the property off. This one, because of the code violations and the concerns that were raised, you wanted to do a negotiated sale. So your choice doesn't have to be solely about any one particular item that we've asked for. That's why I've asked for so many points of interest for you to consider. So we received 10 bids or proposals, which I will tell you, pretty good. Most I've had here in Orono. They ranged in price. So this is a purchase price, and keep in mind that the property outstanding taxes, sewer fees, and administrative costs to the town for this property is a little over $16,000. When we say, what are you paying? What would you pay for it? what we're saying is you're gonna give us this money. We're gonna probably give you some conditions. Once we get this money, we are gonna release all of our interest. So that means that we write off any of the taxes that we don't get paid for. So this is not, they make us whole on taxes and we get X amount of money.
Right.
Is that making sense? Okay.
Yep.
So the bids received ranged for payment, $12,025 to $33,000. 7 of the proposals spoke to bringing the property up to code and then reselling it or renting it. 2 spoke to bringing the property up to code through renovation and having an owner occupancy, single family home for all of that. And then 1 spoke to an immediate sale, immediately demolishing the building, and then sometime in the future, putting up an affordable home in the character of the neighborhood. So one thing to keep in mind is that tax acquired property is not the same as when you go and you buy a property that's put on the market. This is not a clean title unless we've owned the property for, I guess, 5 years now. So it can be very difficult. People aren't going to are going to have a hard time borrowing money. People are going to have potentially a hard time on a sale unless they go through a process to clean the title. But the town's process would not include giving them a warranty deed. This is a quitclaim deed without covenant. So, is there any other information that you need?
Anything else that we want to ask Sophie about?
Is there a timeline on a rebuild, even in the case of a demo? Or is it open-ended loophole that it's gonna be like, well, I'm looking at the one that was demo cap and then whenever it feels right down the road, or is there a timeline that would be required for a rebuild?
So understand that with a negotiated sale, you would tell us you tell me what you wanted, and we would go try to reach an agreement. The reason we did it as a negotiated sale is that you can pass this one of 2 ways. One, you can do, you give me your money, I will give you my quitclaim deed, and here are the covenants. We do it with some strings attached to it. The other way is a purchase and sale agreement that clearly defines what they need to do to then be able to buy the property. So that's what we did at 30 Island Avenue. It took us a long time to negotiate it, but we finally got that done where the deed will not exchange hands until the work is complete. The issue for us is there are pros and cons with both setups. The pro to the purchase and sale arrangement and getting the conditions met is that the town has absolute ability to say, well, we're not gonna do that and sue us, right? If we go the process of putting restrictions in a deed, then we lose control. However, we also lose liability, walks out with it. Am I making any sense for what happens on the parcel? But in order to, somebody would have to go back and try to enforce the deed restriction. Well, it's a different legal position.
So Sophie, and piggybacking off Sam, just the short story, just the nutshell version. If the person buys the property, they have to make the repairs first in the timeline that they've proposed, or they do not have to make the repairs, we just transfer the deed.
That would become your decision, Cheryl.
Okay.
So with 30 Island Avenue, before we transfer the deed, they have to demo the house or bring it back to code, and we've given them until the end of the calendar year to do that, or come up with a better plan that we would agree to in writing.
And then the next part to that is that some of these I mean, with the virus, some of these construction times are going to be lagging. You just can't get the equipment that you need in the time period that you could have before, prior to this.
I would assume that we would work this the way we do other type things, which is if people are making every effort. I also would suggest that you kind of focus in on what you're most interested in or what you absolutely don't want. So if there are ones here that you can eliminate, we could eliminate those. Focus on kind of in general what you're looking for and which proposal best, you want to kind of make as the top proposal, and then send me off to work with that person to get an agreement that would come back to council.
Thank you, Sophie.
Sophie, I was surprised that of the 10 proposals we received, 9 of them thought it could be a house that's salvaged with varying degrees of repair. Some were very expensive and others were a little bit more ambiguous as to what they were going to do in terms of repair. The 10th proposal, and just reading through that proposal, it sounded as though the person who sent that in had a fairly good knowledge of the building, was saying it just isn't worth repairing. We're going to tear it down. Do we have any professional, has anybody on our behalf made any assessment as to the condition of the property?
The only assessment that has been made has been a walk-by, because we did not want to take possession of the home. So we have not been in it. Our understanding is that there are significant issues, likely some structural issues inside, based on what we're hearing from people from the water district, as an example, that had to go in because there was a water main break in the building. And so I would also say, Tom, that it might also depend on what somebody's goals are, that it might not, that the proposal might not just be about structural or not structural integrity.
The other thing that I liked about the 10th proposal, which was the tear down proposal, was affordable housing. The long-term future use was to put up an affordable house there that was consistent with other structures in the neighborhood. And we certainly have talked a lot about affordable housing in Orono.
My question to piggyback on that, Tom, I'm interrupting. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tom.
No, I'm all done.
The timeline. I mean, it is, and it's hard to say. I mean, once they get in there, and if we were to go with a tear down and we had that cap, as it was mentioned, how long would it stay there capped? What would that impact be if it was a capped vacant lot for 3, 4, 5 years? So I would be, my only hesitation would be that's the ambiguous part there. Granted, I mean, when you look at some of the other ones, which are very well meaning and stuff, but is it more of a project than they're anticipating? I mean, because it sounds like it could be an absolute nightmare in there. So I just have a lot of questions about this.
Yeah. And I would assume, Sam, that would be something we could ask our manager to negotiate on. Isn't that correct, Sophie, in terms of a timeline for another house to be on the property?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You just need to tell me what you'd be looking for.
Well, I
Other
guess
questions?
our previous experience, excuse me for interrupting, our previous experience was the home on Island Avenue, and which we did not have so many bids on. It's not as a desirable a neighborhood. And we gave people who are adjacent property owners the chance to make a proposal. And it still took, and we had this great goal of having it taken care of last fall. And that took a year to actually have the sale go through. So is there a way that we can avoid, like, I don't know how that one was different than this one as far as the time to actually close the deal once we've made an agreement with someone. Can you enlighten us about that, Sophie?
Sure, when you only have one bidder, you kind of want to negotiate with them and not scare them off. So we had somebody that we were negotiating with, and there were elements in the initial contract that kept having to go back and forth and go to legal. And we finally got to a place, and then COVID hit, and everybody was locked down. So we had it negotiated in March, and it got signed. Finally, he was able to come in and to sign it in September. So, I mean, when you have 10 people bidding on it, it's a lot easier to say, you're the number one bidder. We'll take the next 2 or 3 weeks to work with you. And if we can't reach an agreement, then we'll go to the next one. It's just hard to do that when you only have one.
Right, okay, that's, yeah, and also this is, you know, there are two of you in this conversation that actually live on this street. I mean, this is real, it's in the heart of a residential community that has really had to endure the deterioration of this building by neglect. And it's, I'm so glad that we're moving forward with trying to move it back into a place that someone could live in. I actually was surprised that only one, all the people who are bidding, except for one, are such optimists that this is a salvageable property. And again, my business is trying to take, you know, reduce, reuse, and recycle. And so I tend to hang out with people who want to take an old building and make it work. But I, just from the outside, I was surprised that we didn't have more bids of people assuming they would just have to tear it down. And my concern is that if only one person that bid on this thinks they're going to have, they might have to, and actually one other I think mentioned that might be a possibility. Is that true? Yeah. So that I wouldn't want to make an agreement with someone who then finds out they're way over their head with, again, as Mitch said in our last conversation, the prices of everything has gone up for building materials. And although they were making the bid since those prices went up, I'm concerned that someone might get in over their head and then we still end up having a building that's not habitable.
Other comments or questions on this
Just one
topic?
more. Is the town, does the town negotiate also the purchase price? So if go ahead. Unmute, Soph.
This is a negotiated sale, so we can go back and have a conversation with them about anything. That's kind of why we did it this way, Cheryl, because we weren't sure exactly what we were going to get. And we didn't want to be in a situation where people felt like we were being unethical because we tried to negotiate something down the road.
I think that the demolition, especially if I haven't been in the property, so I can't tell, but if there is black mold in the house, if that is indeed an issue, then the property probably does need to be demolished. But I'm wondering about the proposed price at the same time, if it's not a little on the low side.
So if we went up in the price, would you also expect to put a restriction or have to have an agreement that they build a house? Might we take the amount that was bid and have the agreement be if they don't build the house within a certain period of time, that they would agree to pay a kind of an extra amount for that? Just a thought, and I don't.
It's an interesting thought, but I guess it also, what I'm struggling with, and I think would be helpful if we could sort out in this conversation, is what is the ultimate goal of disposing of this property? So is the ultimate goal for us to make some extra money, or is the ultimate goal for us to think about the character of the neighborhood? So as much as, you know, the counselor who works on all these budgets every year and me wants to say like, yes, let's make some more money. Let's take as much money as we can get. I think that for me, I think that what we should be focusing on is the character of the neighborhood. So I would be more comfortable. The other thing about the proposal that mentioned demoing the house, they also spoke quite extensively about these very dangerous trees on the property, which I think are an issue for surrounding properties. And so my thought is, if we're thinking about the quality of the neighborhood and the experience of living there, that perhaps I would be more comfortable with the town maybe not really making so much money on this process, but ensuring that you know, a dangerous property would be removed and that a house that's affordable, a single family affordable home that's in the character of the neighborhood would appear on a relatively reasonable timeline. I think I would take the price cut for that personally, but I would be interested to hear from folks, like, what do you all see as really the purpose or the goal here?
So I agree completely with what you just said, Megan. I think that our goal should be to remove a blighted property and to have a property there that is consistent with the neighborhood and hopefully an affordable house. So I would be leaning towards the proposal that would demolish that blighted property and within a reasonable amount of time have another house consistent with the character of the neighborhood there. And again, my goal would be to be an owner-occupied house as opposed to a rental property that we have no control over what's going to be there.
I think that right now, since we own it, because it's tax acquired property, and it is a hazard, health hazard. It's a, you know, it's a problem. But if it were an empty lot, according to our assessor, it is worth tens of thousands of dollars. So if the person buys it for, say, somewhere between $15,000 and $25,000, and it will cost $15,000 or $20,000 to make it a place where you could build a house if it needs to be torn down, then I think instead of saying, if you don't build a house, you owe us money, it should be, we want a house on this piece of land by a certain point. So if you find you're not going to be able to build a house, we would require you, once you clear it, trees and, you know, make it no longer a hazard, that it would then be, the requirement would be that someone needs to build a house, meaning they would have to sell it to someone who would build a house. And as far as, if we don't do that ourselves, I think we don't have we might, I guess you can legally put it in the deed when we sell this, but it seems to me that we aren't selling it ourselves to whoever's going to live in it, then who are we to say that whether it's a rental property or whether it's an owner occupied property? That our goal is safety, our goal is removing a blight, our goal is making sure there's a house there. But I don't know, Tom, you've been on the town council longer. I'm not sure that are we allowed to say that we want it to be owner occupied? Isn't that beyond our scope?
Yeah, probably not. And probably I was just saying my ideal would be that it be an owner occupied house. But I agree with what you just said. You know, we may not be able to control that. And the important thing is that it's reasonably attractive, consistent with the neighborhood, and safe.
So I think the cost of if is a total tear down, and there's so much that's been ignored on this property, that it could cost $10,000 to $20,000 or 15 to 20 to get it so that you could then build on it.
Right.
And the benefit to whoever would build there is that all of the electric and the water and the sewer and the street everything is there, versus in a place where you have to start from scratch. But to get it there, to get it to the point where you build the house, you have to get rid of all of the blight, basically.
So Sophie, do you need some more specific direction? I think you do.
Let me tell you what I think I've heard thus far, and you can tell me I'm wrong. I think what I've heard is that council would like me to try to enter into some negotiations with the, I have it listed as bidder F, and I just want to be really clear to people. The reason we don't have names running around is that staff redacted these proposals, so council does not know who provided what proposal. But that was $18,000 worth of cash that would be given to us immediately upon acceptance of the bid, would be demoed no later than December 15th. And ultimately, in the future, it would be rebuilt for an affordable house would be put there. What I've heard from council is when I go and have this conversation, it sounds like if I can negotiate some ability to get some assurance that the property would, that the affordable house would be built. And potentially whether or not I can talk with legal about a deed restriction for owner occupancy, which we know you can do because we've talked about that for other zoning areas. I think a negotiation is always a back and forth, and I can come and tell you kind of where we are with that, if that makes some sense, but I can reach out to this person in the next day and hopefully have at least initial conversation to be able to report back on Thursday.
So you're reaching out to one of the 10 bidders?
That's what I've heard from council is the direction you seem to be heading in. If there's a I mean, it's really hard to undertake multiple negotiations at the same time.
How do you decide which of the 10?
We decide.
Well, there was only one proposal that was clear tear down. There was a second proposal which raised that as a possibility after a more thorough assessment of the property, but there's just one proposal that said that there was no question in that person's mind they were going to tear the building down.
Do we want to allow bidders to come back with a tear down? So essentially take our universe, shrink it to 10 and give them some time to come back. So everybody comes back with a tear down. That would be another option.
That seems that if we're discounting ones that didn't think that tear down was what had to be done, and yet we didn't write the proposal, we're looking for proposals for tear downs. And I think it would be fair to go back and tell all of the others, give us a proposal for a tear down.
Is there a way? Is there? I'm sorry, Lori. Is there a way? And Terry, I can't wait to hear from you too. I know you're being patient there. To have some sort of assessment so everyone's sort of playing from the same field. I mean, or is that opening another enormous can of worms that we just don't want to do?
So not to jump in front of Terry, but I'm going to, and I apologize, Councilor Grenier. I think everybody has played from the same field. The proposal was out there, was written the same way, the request for proposals. This individual, we had one individual that wanted to demo it. If you want to go out to the demo, you know, if you are saying you want it demoed, then I think that the next step would be either to accept the one proposal tentatively to see if we can negotiate something, or go back to your universe of 10 and ask for demo with timeline. I really, Sam, I don't think we want to get into assessing this property. I think that's a mistake.
Mm.
I think that's the right thing to do, to ask, to say, all give a proposal for tear down. And some of them may walk away because, as I said, I think they're optimists that want to fix old buildings, you know, and make them new again. And if you say, well, we want to know your tear down proposal, some of them may just say, oh, that wasn't my plan. I didn't, you know, I wanted to fix up a building that was fixable. and I was being an optimist that it was fixable. So it may just lower the, make the field smaller anyway, but then give everyone the opportunity. And then we can look through the proposals and see how well they've addressed, what we think are what we fear are major problems with being able to fix the house. That's why we think people should be thinking about a tear down.
So my question is, if we went in that direction that Lori's suggesting, and actually Sophie brought it up, and go back to all of the bidders, are we being unfair to the one bidder who came in with a proposal in a negotiated agreement that we kind of liked? I don't know.
I don't know. I guess I didn't hear us go through each of the 10 and discuss the pros and cons. I myself didn't make a rubric, which I would have if I had a little more time, maybe made of myself a rubric and put all 10 into that rubric to see, how they've met on. And personally, the dollar isn't as important to me as how they're approaching the problem that is this house. And I'd want to. But they were all different, and I appreciated different parts of each of them.
Right.
So so my apologies that that's the way my mind works, and yet I didn't have that prepared before we got together. I was really focusing a lot of my thoughts on Keith Anderson Center before we got here tonight. And so my apologies.
No, don't need.
I think my only other sort of reservation with the bulk of the other proposals is I wasn't super thrilled with the timelines of them. I mean, even though rebuilding is obviously more labor intensive than just removing, so of course a longer timeline would be expected, but there wasn't as much of a sense of urgency. And I know that that's something we could negotiate and say, oh, well, it has to be by such and such a time, but I guess I'm just concerned, and it's something that you brought up earlier yourself, Lori, which is like these people may be in over their heads. And if we negotiate an agreement with someone and then it turns out that it's not at all what they anticipated, it's going to take way longer, it's going to be more expensive, they don't actually want to do it in the end. I mean, it seems like there are some people who may not have a realistic expectation of what should happen or could happen at that property. And we do have at least 2 proposals that have a much more realistic expectation and seem to have a little bit more urgency in terms of the timeline. And for me, again, thinking about the goal being the character of the neighborhood, I think that is also important in the decision making.
Terry, were you going to say something at some point?
Well, I've had so many trains of thoughts go over past 20 minutes here, so bear with me. I don't think it's our place to try to understand whether somebody's in over their head. That's not my responsibility. I don't. If I'm making an assumption that somebody comes in, they make a bid on something, they have the means to do it. So I didn't look at it that way, and I think this kind of went down that road. I kind of took it as a thing of when I looked at individuals who were bidding, in the readings, I found a couple people who were like, one family came back to Orono and wanted to take the space and build it or bring it back to a place for their family. And because we speak of affordable housing all the time, so I thought this was a golden opportunity for somebody to take something in a neighborhood that's desirable and save it. There was actually somebody who's on the panelists right now that actually said that they looked at it and they felt it was salvageable, but they're open to tearing it down. So I think we kind of went down the tearing down road, and I can appreciate that. But I kind of had a different mindset. I think when you start looking at structures that get rebuilt and we have to approve what it's going to be like, then that becomes kind of like one of those neighborhoods where people every house looks the same, and you know, are we in that line of business to start dictating to people what a home can look like? I'm not. I don't want to take that responsibility on for that side of it. So yeah, I guess I was just thinking about it a little bit differently. I'm with the majority of the council and whatever the decision's been made, but I kind of looked at it a lot from the segment of individuals who were really thinking, I've got a family, I want to be in Orono. I don't want. No, I separated out people who created saying, well, I'll probably create a rental. I think we got plenty of rentals. I was just kind of looking at for more of that kind of side of it. That's my thoughts.
Good.
I also would be more in agreement with the person that was interested in building a family home than a rental as well.
Yep. Other comments? Sophie thought she had a direction. I don't know that she still has that direction.
Well,
No.
Sophie, I don't think you need to go back and recreate this and redo the process. The process is done. I don't think going back to people saying, would you be, that just wouldn't be right. I don't think.
I agree, Terry.
People, when they make their bids, they should have thought that, said, I can do this, and give you the options of what they can do.
Yep.
Or if they had questions, they could have asked. So I think going forward that we have to, I hope we all agree not to go back out, but to figure out where we go from here.
Good
Thing
point.
that was appealing to me with the tear down, part of it was the concern for safety and dealing with the trees in the back, and there seemed to be a very complete picture of making it safe first and then determining. So Terry, I really appreciate your comments. It's really got me thinking about a number of things here too. Who, you know, right? Who are we to dictate, you know, I mean, certain things, but we're town council for one, but it's a matter of what is safe for the community. I mean, I think right now it's really dangerous because it's an abandoned home basically, and that can absolutely attract all sorts of trouble. But I mean, I think, you know, plus having people on that property with, you know, trees hanging, you know, precariously apparently, I think that's, I don't know, that's a big part of it, but I just don't know how to proceed from here. And I don't think there are many that were mentioning rentals other than they want to fix this property, they want to sell it as a family dwelling. That's what I kind of get. What was that? 3 mentioned rentals?
So just to clarify, like when I'm talking about, you know, the character of the neighborhood, I don't mean like, hey, let's make some McMansions. So all the houses look the same. I get your point. I don't like that either, Terry. But just in terms of the size of the home and that it is a single family home, and I agree with Tom, like I would want to at least explore what rights or what options we have when it comes to deed restriction on an owner occupied home, because one of the problems that it's a big barrier for families trying to live in Orono, families who are not you know, in a higher tax bracket. It is almost impossible to find a rental unit. Cheryl, I know you know this. I'm very fortunate that I own my home, because what happens is you get a single family home and they price it per bedroom, and they do that for college students, and it is too expensive for a family to live in unless they are a family of great means. And that's a problem we have in this town. And I think it's also consistent with our comp plan to think about that and address that. So I would be very interested in looking at whether we can do a deed restriction on that. And also, you know, I feel like the tear down proposal, for the same reasons Sam just mentioned, the concern about safety and the urgency of, you know, getting that to be less of an eyesore and less of a safety hazard in the neighborhood appealed to me. And I would want to negotiate a timeline for putting up a single family home, hopefully owner occupied. So I'm just going to be as black and white as possible, because I feel like we're just kind of swirling around here and not coming up with a decision. So that's where I'm at.
So I guess I rented 2 homes before I was able to buy one in Orono, and they were not here because I couldn't afford to rent here. So one in Hamden and then one in Bangor. So is it that you don't want rentals, or is it you don't want rentals that are cut up into being rented to college students versus families? So that's, if you put a deed restriction, those of us who were trying to rent family homes and couldn't afford them here because their prices were too high, still wouldn't be served by having it be owner occupied, deed restriction that says it has to be an owner occupied home.
Right, but
And,
Lori, the point would be that it would be at a low enough price point that it could potentially be a starter home for a family that is not in a higher tax bracket.
All right, thank you for saying that, because my next was, we keep using the words affordable housing. Do you have a dollar per square foot target sale price that you're looking at to call that meets that description? What is the definition of affordable?
Are we in over our heads here with the whole starting to
Yeah.
determine the price that they're going to sell the house for? I
What is
mean,
affordable?
I don't think we can say, hey, buy this property, tear it down, and build a house that has to be sold for $160,000.
I agree.
I don't know. I didn't use the word affordable. I just wanted somebody to, whoever was using it,
Well,
to
it's
define
been a
what that
theme of
means.
yours in the past, affordable housing. So
Yeah, I mean,
So-
What'd you say?
I used affordable because that's the word we use a lot about saying that we lack affordable housing, which is basically somebody who would probably be middle of the road type people. We have a big swing in our price ranges typically in this town. So I use the word affordable. Just, I don't know what other better word to use. I don't have a set price, but I think affordable is pretty simplistic in the manner that it means that the average individual can afford to live in that house. So that's what I was meaning.
And I'm talking just in terms of, I didn't come with calculations, I apologize, but I'm speaking more generally in terms of what happens in different neighborhoods of our town. So for example, on Main Street, I am not in a tax bracket where I could ever afford to buy a home on Main Street in Orono. That's my life. And I know that, but on College Heights, maybe if it was a reasonably sized in the character of the neighborhood, then it would be in a price point for somebody who is not in a high enough tax bracket to afford a $500,000 home on Main Street. So that's what and when we talk about rental properties, if it is a 3-bedroom house, it will, the rental price will be $500 to $700 per bedroom. And then it will be occupied by individuals who come together to live in a house together, and probably not a family, or at least it will exclude a lot of families. So that I'm talking in relative terms, if that's helpful, but I feel like we're getting off the path.
So
So-
can I just suggest that, I can't speak for the bidders, but when you look at the type of deed that you get with a tax acquired sale, it is entirely possible that you're going to have somebody hold that property for 5 years or so while you wait out the period of time so that you can then get a clean title. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's renovated, if it was rented, unless the people were saying they were going to move into it, just because you see that a lot with tax acquired property. And if it came down, I wouldn't be surprised if you saw a period of time of at least a couple of years before a house went up on it for that reason as well. And just remember, right now, technically you own it. So you can decide what you want. And then just to throw in more information than you probably need, when we use the term affordable home, it's a calculation from Main State Housing. The last time I did that calculation, an affordable home in Orono was a home that sold for $175,000 or less. I think that was 2-bedroom.
So Sophie, I think the consensus discussion has been to encourage you to go forward with the bidder who proposed tearing it down, trying to work on a timeline, if possible, and see where you can go, where you can get. Is that the consensus from the group?
I like the idea of offering everyone the opportunity to propose tearing it down.
Tom, what was your proposal again, please? I'm sorry, I just stepped back into the room, sorry.
Yeah, well, my suggestion was that Sophie go forward and try to negotiate with the bidder who initially had said they were going to tear it down, cap it over, take care of the dangerous elements in the yard, and in the not too distant future, put another house on that lot. What I was hoping she could do was negotiate some timelines on that. Lori is proposing that we send it out again to all of the bidders, asking them if they would like to submit a proposal to tear it down. I respect that opinion. I'm personally not in favor of that because I think the bidders had the option of proposing that in the first place.
Okay, thank you, Tom, and thank you, Lori. Thank you, everybody, for your comments on this. It's helped me sort of chew it over. My opinion is, given that we all looked at the whole thing, I am impressed with the considerations for safety and with that. What did you call them? Bidder F, Sophie?
Yeah.
The demo?
Yes, I would be willing to go with that as well. With the attempt at negotiating more of a timeline on a rebuild and sale, or if that was what was happening.
Other comments on that from anybody?
I think my only drawback, whether it's renovated or demolished, is again that the house be made available for sale as an owner occupied. And I know there were a couple bids that were talking about as a rental. I'd like to see it as an owner occupied and keep it, as Megan said, and consistent with the neighborhood. But if somebody feels that they can renovate, and like I said, I haven't been in the property, so I can't make a very good a judgment on the condition of the property. I can only go by what people are saying. But I think that would be my only thing, is that we find a bidder who is amenable to making the property for sale to another homeowner and not a rental, if we can do that.
Mm-hmm. Are we okay to move forward with this? Sophie, you all?
So I've heard from 4 counselors, 3 saying yes to move in this direction, giving me some guidance, 1 saying that they really want it to go back out. I think I saw Counselor Gardner's chin go up and down, and I'm not sure about Counselor Grenier. So I don't want to be pushing anything here.
I'm good. The only thing that I'm milling in my head is I can, after hearing some more conversations, more so from the last statement from Meg, I would be okay with that. I don't think I'd be okay with saying that somebody'd have to be owner occupied completely, now that I think about it. But I think like a rental for a family would be great too, I guess, now that I've heard the comments. I think the thing that I wouldn't, when I was thinking about rental, would be more like the kids renting a room kind of thing. Which wouldn't be good for that neighborhood just in general. But so I'm okay with it.
So you would be okay with renting as long as it doesn't meet the definition of student home in our land use ordinance?
Right.
Right.
Okay.
And yes, I thought my earlier, like, this is what I think. Yes, I agree with the direction that Tom mentioned. And just we can see how these negotiations go, and we're not necessarily locked into accepting this bid. I mean, it is a negotiation, so this is just the first step in a process, and we can get the process moving.
Yep.
So if it were not a tear down, it's not a very large house, so it might actually meet affordable housing criteria according to what Sophia just gave us as the definition. But if it's a tear down and someone gets to build, is there a way we can stipulate that we don't want it to be more than a 3-bedroom house in hopes of keeping it at a lower price point?
Interesting question.
Good question. Do you have an answer for that, Sophie?
I don't in this moment. So how about if we're kind of on that track, let me see what I can find out. I'll have a conversation with our town attorney, and if we're on the track of me working with this bidder, we'll see what I can bring back on Thursday.
Okay,
So
sounds good.
I have direction. If you wouldn't mind starting the next conversation, and maybe Belle could come on screen. I've got to just stop. I need to drop out of the meeting for just a minute, and I'll be right back.
Okay. So our next item is guidelines. Oh, there I am. Cindy, are you coming back with the
I don't know.
gavel?
You were doing a great job, Tom.
Oh, come on. I'm working too hard here.
So I'm back.
Great. Thank you.
I'm on to item number 4, council discussion, creating a policy or guidelines for considering adopting council proclamations and resolutions. Belle, did she put you on this because you had something to say, or just because you like to look at your face?
I guess you guys just get to look at my face.
Okay. Well, because you guys have been doing all the talking, I've been sitting here. Maybe I'll throw this out. We've had a lot of, in this political climate, we've had a lot of resolutions and proclamations come at us. And I think for me personally, I would like to see kind of a policy where we talk about, you know, should there be something that affects Orono, or we can show that it would affect Orono. For example, how we work the healthcare resolution of last week versus a resolution a couple of years ago about getting out of a war. You know, maybe you can say that they were Orono residents in the military, but so that's kind of where I'm coming at it, is I think that there should be some sort of policy to kind of limit what we're doing. And I do know we had a constituent today send us an email that was saying that we should try to be careful that we have a not just one focus group that's because they're loud, we're making resolutions, and whether we should really look at more of what Orono as a whole would be considering. So I throw those out there for discussion.
I think the email we received from the constituent had some really good points in it. I like the idea of developing a policy and connecting future resolutions to the community, and doing it in a real deliberative manner. I think there were some items on our agenda that indicated where does it go first? Does it go to a workshop? Does it go to a particular committee? But a lot of opportunity for discussion before it gets to a council meeting, I hope.
I agree, Tom. I tell you, I read that email also. This has been something I've been struggling with a little bit also. I know that I've said it before that when we start getting a lot of these coming up, and it's great that if you're a citizen that really has a passion for something, that's fine. But then all of a sudden we get the barrage and people start to ask why that, or whether or not we should be the advocate for something that individual is passionate about. So I may not have the same level of passion as the person who's proposing it. And typically, yes, it is a segment. And so I agree with it being a standardized kind of thing to look at, but it becomes more of a global thing of whether or not this would be what the town as a whole would be behind. So I'm right there with you on that one.
So though I do think it becomes complicated to, and I appreciated that email as well. I think it becomes complicated. Sure, we can have public hearings, but to try to assess whether something represents the view of the town, of its community as a whole, I think is really complicated and challenging. I'm not even sure. I'm not even sure if it's possible. And so I just to bring it back to a comment I made when we were discussing the last resolution, which is when you are an individual politician representing a segment of a community, you can make your values statement and you can be voted out of office or reelected. I mean, that's, you know, it's a little bit different when there's a council of 7 individuals. And for us to make, you know, a larger values statement that may or may not represent the majority of the town, that becomes very complicated, and it puts councilors in strange positions where, you know, they may not necessarily, they may feel like you say, Terry, like, about an issue, but the rest of council is gung ho behind it. And then, you know, all 7 are held accountable for that resolution, because very rarely do people go back and kind of say, well, what was the conversation? So I think that makes it very complicated. And for me, I've always felt about resolves that they should be directly connected to Orono's operations in some way. That there needs to be a clear and present connection to what it is that the town of Orono is doing in terms of its money and its, you know, how it operates. And so I understand that there are very passionate people in this town who really just want to do something. And they say, you know, I want my town council to have this value statement that kind of aligns with this political movement at the moment. And I get that. I feel that way too a lot. But I think we need to connect it to the town in some way, which is why I was comfortable with the healthcare one, and why I was comfortable with the carbon one, because there are very real impacts on the town and on its budget. But what I will say is, so that would be my litmus test. I wouldn't be in favor of creating a mechanism that prevents these types of resolution proposals from residents from arriving on our doorstep, because I think the conversations that happen around them are important. I may not think it's appropriate for the town council to adopt a resolution about X, Y, and Z, because there's no clear connection to town operations or its budget. But I do appreciate the opportunity to say publicly, I support this, and here's what I think about it. Do I think that it's appropriate for this council to have the resolution? No, but it does give us an opportunity to talk about the issues. And I think that that is a valuable service to the community. So I wouldn't want a litmus test that excludes people from bringing these to us, but I do want some sort of policy and structure that we can fall back on, that would talk about, you know, how is it connected directly to our operations.
I agree with the need for some parameters of what works, what actually sort of meets the merit of this, and making that connection. At the same time, it's not always necessarily going to be a budget line item. It very well could be, you know, acknowledging the way a specific population of our town feels or is feeling at the moment, you know. I think there are a variety of reasons that we could have the discussion. I don't know exactly what the criteria would be, though, to say, okay, this referendum is okay and this one is not. I'm curious as to what that would be.
Could I make a suggestion that maybe we set up a policy that when we get something in, and I'll just use the healthcare because it's the most recent one we've talked about. I think we do have kind of an unwritten policy that the resolution comes in and it goes to a committee. I think it should go to the appropriate committee, where if it's, you know, community development or comp plan, and that we say, how is the town affected by a pro or con resolution to something, and have the committee basically say it meets that test or it doesn't. And if it doesn't meet that test, it doesn't go any farther. If it does meet that, it affects the community test. And I think that's up to the committee to decide how it affects the community. Then it can go to full full council for a resolution.
Yep.
Is that,
I wrote down a little bit, I mean, as someone who kind of advocated for this kind of policy to start this resolution process, that when we passed the Pride resolution, it was a human rights issue. When we looked at the carbon fee, it was an environmental issue. And when we looked at equitable health care, we changed it from universal, which tended to be a political, kind of a political thing these days. It addressed social barriers like poverty. So I think we set parameters on our own, in our own way. I don't know how to write all of those down because I think it might end up being a case by case basis. But if we decide that if it's political, I think we can't really take a stance because we're nonpartisan. Advocacy, I don't know, possibly, but I think we do have to have a scale, I think, of what we want to represent as a town. Sophie.
So I've done a bunch of research into what other places have done. Unfortunately, they tend to be really large, but I think it's something we can still learn from. Cheryl, they talk about being not political or espousing a particular ideology, not taking kind of a stance. However, one of their positive statements was that it has to be in line with existing council policy. So, for example, the environment piece, we have some pretty solid environmental policies here that other towns don't have. That makes sense. So I think you're still able to tie it to something. Each one of those things you just spoke about, you're able to tie it to. I think, so every once in a while, there are resolutions that Cindy and I kick out because they're for a private person or from a different state, no connection with Orono, or they are about a private business. Not a proclamation where council says, wow, this business got an award, let's proclaim it, and that would feel a little bit different. So I think that there are some criteria based on what you're talking about that I can pull that would look very similar to what you're talking about. Timelines seem to be anywhere between 15 and 60 days. And I think that is just a testament to how often people were meeting. But as your staff, I don't take positions on your resolutions and proclamations unless they were going to get you into legal trouble. But I can tell you the most stress comes when somebody puts something in my inbox on a Thursday and they want it done by the following Monday. And that seems like a long time to them. But for us, there isn't an opportunity to even get it out there and post it for people to see. So I would think you'd really want to look at that timeline and think about where the flow might be. That could be as much as a month to get it into the appropriate committee and then back out for a workshop or council to see. So you might want to say, if you want a resolution, it's got to be in at least 45 days before you want it. Some of them put limits on how many times an individual can request in a year, or how many that you'll only do one on a specific topic in a year, because they have some serial requesters and some topics that get a lot of attention. I think it's important. And the reason I put the government speech piece in your background is you guys can take positions. You don't have to be quiet, but the political and legal implications, sometimes you just have to be aware of that. So that's the other thing that I saw was, along with the direct tie that Megan spoke to, that it has to come from somebody in Orono. So like, when you think about your equitable healthcare, all three of those that you just talked about, although they might have larger groups behind them, they were Orono residents that came and took the time to work with staff to meet your general guidelines and get a resolution that you would like in front of you.
I also, I mean, I liked what you were talking about, Cindy, in terms of like thinking about a process as to where does this enter the stream, and like, does it go any further than, and I'd also just want to address this question of staff time that was part of our background materials, because staff time and work equals taxpayer dollars. And so what would be important to me about developing a policy here is to also make sure that there's a question in the background material about, is staff expected to do the research if someone proposes, you know, or do they have to come with their own research? I would absolutely not want to put staff in a position to have to readjust their workflow to start doing a bunch of research on an issue simply because somebody asked for a resolution, whether that person is a counselor or a resident. And I would think that, like many of the other things in our work plan, that if the proposal for a resolution comes to a committee, to the appropriate committee, that it would have to get, you know, the majority of that committee's approval. For, you know, the committee itself could say, hey, I think this is something that's really important. You know, yes, we should devote staff time to it, and not that it would just be automatically assumed that staff would have to do some research simply because someone proposed something.
Cindy, to that effect, also, I agree with that also. And I think that if we start this process of looking at a committee, maybe it should be my committee, the community development side of it, simply because it would probably encompass everything as a spot to kind of be the landing pad for that. I'd say that'd probably be a good first step, but I do really appreciate your thought on that, because it really makes it a bit easier to kind of manage, and we don't throw it at our staff, because I don't want the staff to have to be like going, Sophie, at Thursday going like, oh my gosh, I've got to, by Monday, that's just not doable. So this process, by putting in place, will make it that much easier.
Yeah. And I'm thinking of like about a 45-day turnaround. We could do it quicker, but it gives us time to, like, if it comes into a committee, we may miss the council, that month's council meeting. So we've got time to go to the next council meeting. So
if it goes to Terry's committee, you will every single time miss the council meeting. So I think 45 days sounds good.
Is this something that, Sophie, you have enough that you could maybe do a rough draft that you and I could talk about and then bring it back to council? Anybody else have anything that they want us to look at?
No,
Okay.
sounds fine.
Sophie and I will do a quick bring it back to council. All right, moving on to council discussion, FY21 Town Council Work Plan Progress Update. Looks like we've been doing a lot, guys. I'm really impressed. So, Sophie, did you just put it there so that we looked impressive as to how much we did, or is there something you wanted us to?
No, when we talked about your work plan, part of what I heard as my marching orders was I was supposed to bring it back once a quarter, and we've completed one quarter. So I just wanted to touch base and make sure that folks are okay with what the plan looks like and the progress that we're making towards our next, towards hopefully meeting the goals. Some of them will have to be shuffled a little bit because I think COVID is with us longer. So some of them I think are going to be slowed down, but I think we're making some good progress. I also just want to highlight for you that we're going to have a little bit of quick shifting of the gears. We're going to start working on marijuana ordinance pieces, and then shift to the fluoridation of the water supply, because that referendum will be in June. On Thursday, we're going to recap our racial and social equity and inclusion plans, along with the 2nd becomes November 2nd is a big discussion about rentals and trying to come up with a cohesive path kind of forward, some direction to staff. And also on the 29th of October, we've got asset management planning, which is the basis for a lot of our financial work. So, busy couple of weeks coming up.
Is there any time that isn't busy?
Did anyone have any comments on our work plan?
No, impressed with the progress.
Yep, we're moving along. We've been very busy. I've been very impressed with us. All right, if no one has any comments on that, we'll move on to the brief town manager report.
I'm going to make it really brief because we're coming up on 2 hours, which is a long time for a Zoom meeting. And we're going to meet again on Thursday. Right now, this coming Thursday, we will officially sell the bonds and take the steps we need to. Cindy did a great job taking a break from the wedding to find a FedEx in Rangeley to make sure we could get the documents where they needed to go. We are right now we're turning around the documents for the audit, which is taking just a little bit of time to kind of stop and pay attention to those. And I think the other activity that we have is really would be better discussed on Thursday.
Good.
Sounds good. All right. With that, we will adjourn. I'll take a motion.
So moved.
Don't all jump on. There you go. I can tell that you're all in favor. So we'll talk to you on Thursday.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.